Hello and welcome to this video. This video is the second video in the series about AL developers we need to do better. This video we're going to look at some of the workflows and how we have to improve them. Well, let's get started. First off, remember there's a link to the blog post in the description below. The first topic we're going to cover is staying up to date. Now, back in the old days, staying up to date wasn't that difficult because Microsoft didn't come with that many new things. They may have released a new version every year, but not much has really changed in those versions. So many of us, the way that we stayed up to date was that we went to conferences like NAB Tech Days, which was great because we got all the MVPs telling us about all the new things coming and everything that was going on. And then we were ready to go for that year. And yeah, that was pretty much all we needed to do. And even if we did not adapt all these new things, nothing really happened because, as I said, not that much changed in the product itself. However, that has changed now. Since we moved to the cloud, Microsoft is pushing new updates, new features all the time, changing the product. Now again, you could say that you don't have to adapt all these things, but however, if you don't adapt them going forward all the time, then at some point you're going to be so much behind and it's going to be a very large battle to get everything back up to date. Now, how do we stay up to date nowadays? Well, I still think you should go to the conferences like Tech Days, BC Tech Days, or Days of Knowledge. However, that is not enough just to go to these two conferences once or twice a year. We also have to stay in touch. We have to keep up with everything else going on. So how do we do this? So besides going to these conferences, how do we stay up to date? Well, the best way is to follow the MVPs on LinkedIn and on Twitter. They will always keep on coming with new things that is important happening to the product behind the scenes. Then, of course, he's also an MVP, but Eric Haugaard has a very great YouTube channel where he goes through all the new features coming in every release before it actually gets there. So that's also a very great way to learn what is coming. And besides that, you also have to keep up to date with all the Microsoft release notes. Now, this might sound like a lot of work, especially because besides this, we also have to do our normal job, and we don't want to use too much of our spare time on this because luckily, nowadays, there's a very good focus on work-life balance because all of us, we have a social life. We also have things we need to do with our families. So we can't spend all our time learning about new things coming into Business Central. So what I would suggest is that if your company gets in a certain size, you need to get one person or people where part of the job is actually keeping up to date with all these things. It is reading blog posts, it is watching YouTube videos, it is going to conferences or going to other kind of workshops, and then figure out which of these things do we need to tell the rest of our team, and then they compile it into small nuggets and tell people this is what we need to adapt going forward. Now again, I know this is going to be a difficult thing to implement because in our world we still have this problem where these things are not billable hours. But the problem is that if we don't keep our developers up to date, we're going to lose them. And there's two reasons for this. The first reason is that most developers got into the field because they like when things evolve. They like to have to keep on learning new things. So if you're going to stop your developers from learning new things, then they're going to look for somewhere else to work. The second thing is that if you get stuck with these people who don't want to learn anything, that means all the people that are learning new things, that are getting more attracted to the market, those are going to be stolen by your competitors, and you're going to be left with people who have not kept up to date. So these are the people that the market really doesn't want, and therefore you're going to have a team with limited knowledge about what is going on. So that's the first thing I would say. Stay up to date. The second workflow that we have to look at is code review. Now, code review in itself is very self-explanatory. Of course, we need code review. Code review is a great way for us to share knowledge and to show people what we have coded and how we can change it. And since we are now, all of us are using Git as a source control, code review is actually built into part of this workflow. So it's very easy nowadays to actually adapt this. Of course, it's going to be the same problem as we had with keeping up to date. You're going to have to face this problem where people are going to say, or your bosses are going to say, yeah, but this is not billable hours, so why am I going to pay another programmer to read something that this programmer already did? Well, again, it's a very good way to ensure that the code is readable, that every guidelines has been kept, and to ensure the quality of the code and a good way of sharing knowledge. One thing that is important to note about code review is, and something that a lot of people think, is that code review is not always this where you have a senior developer reading the junior developer's code, and then afterwards going in and saying, oh, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, and making the junior developer feel very bad. No, it's also a way for developers to share. So maybe sometimes when you read some code review, you're going to think, hey, that was a great way of doing that. I never thought of that. Maybe I'll try to do this in the future. So it's also a good way to actually see new ways of solving problems. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in this very combined hole where we all think we all do the same thing every day because everything has to go fast, and we have to think, why should I try to change something? I know this always works. But just because something works doesn't mean it's the best way to do something. Now, besides having code review, which every developer should actually do to every pull request going in to the test or the release branch, I would also suggest you actually have, like you have the IT audit, you also once in a while have something called code audit. And again, here I would say that you should have like 1 or 2 people in your company where part of the job is actually going through the extensions of all the customers and looking and making sure that all the guidelines are kept, that we are changing and making sure that everything is ready for the future, and performing this code audit on the extension as a whole. Once the code audit has been done, you will make a report. You will then find the lead developer or all the developers on this customer who made this extension and go through the things that you have found, and then say, yeah, we need to change this so we are up to date and making sure that everything is in line with the guidelines that we have agreed upon. But again, this is a role that is going to be difficult for some to implement because, again, doing code audit is not something, unless you are very good, you cannot sell this time to the customer because the customer just expects our code to be good. They don't expect us to have to waste a lot of time on all of this. Now, I already talked a little bit about this, but we need some guidelines. And a good way to find guidelines is actually the page AL Guidelines. I will provide a link in the description below. This is where you can find some of the great design patterns and guidelines that you should adapt in your code. Now, in a perfect world, we would adapt all of these. However, a more realistic is that you're going to have some people, like the ones we already mentioned, that should look through these guidelines and make sure what is new and what has come here, and then choose some of them and say, these are the ones we're going to implement, and teach the rest of the team how to implement these design patterns. Now, the great thing about this AL Guidelines page is that it's community driven, which means that if you have a guideline that's not provided on this page already, you can actually submit it and it might be approved and then it will be added. The next thing that I'm going to talk about here is that we need to become full stack developers. Now, this has become a popular way to think because everything nowadays is becoming so interconnected that just knowing how to code in AL or CAL is not enough. We need to be able to also adapt on this low code, no code concept. We also need to know a little bit of web development. We also need to know a little bit about .NET development. Now, I'm not saying that we need to be experts in these fields, but we need to know how the things connect to each other and how we can implement them in our solutions as a whole. Nowadays, it's become very popular to have these architect roles everywhere, solution architects, IT architects, and so on. But to be honest, we really need to focus more on that each developer needs to be an architect on their own code. We all need to be able to create the best solutions for our customers using the best products. So the whole idea is that we have to be open to learn new development languages, because not only by learning these new development languages, we will open up your world to have more components to fit into your design, but it's also a great way to look if you, for example, start learning Java or start learning C# and see, okay, so the people in these communities, they solve the problem doing it this way of coding, while we do it in AL this way. It's a great way to actually learn how other people code and maybe adapt some of those design patterns. Because let's be honest, most of the AL design patterns that we have is actually something that we stole from other languages. Because even though that the AL development community is a great community, it's very small when you compare it to like C# or Java or Python. So let's just get inspiration from other communities who has already been where we are and adapt that to our workflows. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is the Boy Scout rule. Now, the Boy Scout rule is pretty simple. It means that you should always leave the code in a better state than you found it. But what does that actually mean? Well, it means that we have to refactor our code constantly. We have to make sure that we only have the code in our extensions that we need. So we don't need all this bloat code. Now, there are two main reasons why we don't do this. The first reason is that a lot of us have this idea that, okay, someone has pushed this code into our branch, but I can say that something of this is not as I would have done it. It's maybe a bit more complicated than I wanted to, but it's not my code, it's not my problem. But we have to stop thinking about this, because once the code has been added to a branch, a test branch or release branch or whatever branching strategy you're running, the code is no longer your code. The code is the extensions code. That means there is no such thing as code ownership anymore. So you should not feel bad about changing someone else's code. The second reason why a lot of people do not do code refactoring is because they're scared that if they start refactoring code, they're going to start breaking something. Now, to solve this problem, we need to implement unit testing. And that is exactly what we're going to start talking about in the next video. Now, we're not going to write in the unit test in the next video. We're going to talk about having good tests in place and what it means to have a testable solution. So to conclude on this video, these were just some things that I think we need to start thinking about if we need to adapt them into part of our workflow going forward. Well, until next time, stay safe and goodbye.